The smell of lemon-scented floor wax was the only thing that made Arthur Sterling feel like the world made sense. As he pushed the heavy industrial buffer across the lobby of the Hastings Plaza, the rhythmic thrum, thrum, thrum of the machine drowned out the noise of a city that moved, too fast for its own good. To the suits rushing past him, Arthur was part of the architecture, as invisible as the drywall and just as silent. He liked it that way. At 32, Arthur had the weary eyes of a man who had seen the bottom of too many trash cans and the top of too many spreadsheets. His shift ended at 5 p.m. He retreated to the basement locker room, swapped his gray work shirt for a faded flannel, and checked his locker. Resting on top of his bag was a thick, cream-colored envelope. The cardstock was so heavy it could have doubled as a weapon. He opened it. "Arthur, I'm having an engagement gala at the Obsidian Estate this Saturday. I know you're probably busy scrubbing someone's toilet, but I thought you should see what a man with a real future looks like. Consider it a lesson in ambition. Try not to smell like bleach. Elena." Arthur stared at the gold leaf lettering. The Obsidian Estate. He knew the place. He'd signed the deed for it 3 years ago through a blind trust. It was a $500 million fortress of glass and basalt, perched on a cliffside like a hawk. "Ambitious," Arthur muttered, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. Saturday evening arrived with a biting chill. Arthur pulled his 2012 sedan, which rattled with the rhythmic protest of a dying lawnmower, up the winding, cobblestone drive of the estate. The headlights flickered, illuminating the fleet of Ferraris and Maybachs lined up like shiny toys. He rolled down the window as he reached the valet stand. A young man named Marcus, dressed in a sharp red waistcoat, looked at Arthur's car with an expression usually reserved for a crime scene. "Sir, the service entrance is 2 miles back down the hill," Marcus said, not even reaching for the door. "I'm a guest," Arthur said, handing over the heavy cream invitation. Marcus blinked, looking from the card to Arthur's worn boots. "Right, well, I'll put this behind the hedge so nobody hits it with a real car." Arthur reached into his pocket and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. He'd found it in the miscellaneous drawer of his office earlier that day. "Keep it close, Marcus. She's sensitive about her spark plugs." Marcus's eyes nearly popped out of his head. The sneer vanished, replaced by a frantic, toothy grin. "Sir, my apologies. I'll guard her with my life." Arthur stepped out, adjusting the cuffs of his suit. It was a dark charcoal wool, no labels, no logos. To the untrained eye, it was a budget rental. To a master tailor, it was a work of art that cost more than Marcus's college tuition. Inside the gala was a sea of silk and ego. Arthur grabbed a sparkling water and retreated to a corner, watching the spectacle. Then he saw her. Elena looked radiant in a dress that probably cost 3 months of Arthur's janitor salary. She was clinging to the arm of a man who looked like he had been manufactured in a factory for generic villains. "Arthur, you actually came." Elena's voice cut through the air, sharp and mocking. She marched over, her heels clicking like a countdown. "I told Julian you might be too embarrassed to show your face." The man beside her, Julian Vane, smirked. He adjusted his velvet loafers, worn without socks. "Naturally," and looked Arthur up and down. "So this is the maintenance supervisor?" Julian chuckled, his voice booming so the nearby socialites could hear. "Listen, Artie, I think someone spilled a martini near the piano. Why don't you go find a mop and do what you're best at?" "I'm off the clock, Julian," Arthur said evenly. "But thanks for the tip." "He's always been like this," Elena sighed, looking at Arthur with genuine pity. "No drive, no vision. You're content with the crumbs, Arthur." Julian, on the other hand. "Julian is buying this entire estate. We're moving in next month." Arthur took a slow sip of his water. "Buying it? From whom?" Julian puffed out his chest. "The Sterling Global Trust. I've been in high-level talks with their representatives for weeks. The owner is a reclusive old hermit who doesn't know the value of what he has. I'm going to turn this place into the Vane dynasty headquarters." "Bold plan," Arthur said, his eyes scanning the room. He spotted Mr. Henderson, the estate manager, standing by the grand staircase. Henderson was looking at Julian with the same expression one might use to look at a persistent housefly. Bold? Julian laughed. It's inevitable. Now, if you'll excuse us, I have to go speak with the manager. People of my stature don't stay in the corner. As they walked away, Arthur saw Henderson's eyes lock onto his. The manager started to move toward him, but Arthur gave a microscopic shake of his head. Not yet. Arthur wandered toward the buffet, reaching for a shrimp cocktail, when he heard a commotion near the entrance. A group of burly men in floral design uniforms were arguing with Julian. I don't care about your banking errors, Mr. Vane, the head florist shouted, loud enough to stop the music. The deposit for the floral arch was $80,000. Your card was declined. No pay, no peonies? The room went silent. Elena's face turned the color of a ripened tomato. Julian began to sweat, his wealthy facade cracking like cheap plaster. Arthur set down his shrimp and started walking toward the chaos. It's a security lockout, Julian hissed, though his voice cracked at the end. My bank sees a 5-figure charge and they freeze the account. It's a protection measure for high-net-worth individuals. You wouldn't understand. I understand that my truck is idling. Outside and my crew doesn't work for protection measures, the florist snapped. He signaled his team. Pack it up, boys. Take the orchids first. Elena looked like she wanted to melt into the Italian marble floors. She grabbed Julian's arm, her voice a frantic whisper. Julian, do something! Everyone is looking! Arthur stepped out of the shadows of a Greek column, swirling the ice in his glass. He arrived at the edge of the confrontation, just as Julian began to berate a passing waiter for distracting him. Seems like a lot of fuss over a few flowers, Arthur said mildly. Julian whirled around, his face slick with sweat. Shut up, Arthur. Go back to your corner and eat your free shrimp. This is a billionaire's problem. You wouldn't know 80 grand if it hit you in your subsidized dental plan. You're right, Arthur nodded. I usually deal in much larger numbers. They're easier to track. Elena stepped toward Arthur, her eyes flashing with a mix of embarrassment and rage. Not now. Arthur, just go. You're making this more pathetic than it already is. Arthur ignored her and looked at the florist. How much was the total? For the whole weekend? The florist looked Arthur up and down. He saw the no-name suit and the calm demeanor. 120,000, including the Sunday brunch arrangements. Why? You got a spare kidney to sell. A few socialites near the bar snickered. Julian let out a bark of a laugh. Careful, Artie. If you try to write a check, the ink might bounce higher than your career. Arthur didn't look at Julian. He looked past the florist, catching the eye of Mr. Henderson, who had been hovering near the library doors like a silent vulture. Arthur gave a single sharp nod. Henderson stepped forward, his footsteps echoing with authority. Is there a problem here, Mr. Vane? Just a banking glitch, Henderson, Julian said, trying to regain his swagger. Tell these peasants to finish the setup. I'll have my personal assistant wire the funds on Monday morning. Henderson didn't even glance at Julian. He looked at the florist. The Sterling Trust maintains a discretionary fund for unforeseen hospitality expenses. Use the house account. Full payment, plus a 20% inconvenience gratuity for the delay. The florist's eyes widened. The house account? You mean the owner is paying for this guy's wedding flowers? The owner is ensuring the evening remains aesthetic, Henderson said, his voice as dry as a desert. Please, continue your work. As the florists scurried back to their stations, Elena let out a massive sigh of relief. She turned to Julian, her eyes shining. See? They already treat you like family, Julian. The owner must have heard about your offer and wants to keep you happy. Julian puffed out his chest, his ego inflating faster than a hot air balloon. Exactly. That's how the big leagues work, Elena. It's called professional courtesy. You see that, Arthur? That's what influence looks like. The owner of the most expensive house in the state just covered my tab because he wants to stay on my good side. Arthur took a slow sip of his water. Is that what you think happened? I know it is, Julian sneered. Now why don't you make yourself useful? I dropped a cocktail olive near the fountain. Hop to it, maintenance supervisor. The dinner was served in the grand refectory, a room lined with floor-to-ceiling tapestries. Arthur was seated at the pity table, the one furthest from the head of the room, tucked behind a massive floral arrangement. paid for by his own trust. The drama, however, was only beginning. Halfway through the second course, the doors swung open. Two men in dark charcoal suits, real suits, the kind that smelled like law degrees and cold. Steele walked straight toward the head table. The room went quiet again. Julian looked up from his Wagyu beef, a fork halfway to his mouth. "Can I help you?" "This is a private event. Mr. Julian Vane?" the taller of the two asked. "We're from Sterling Legal Counsel. We're here regarding your letter of intent to purchase this property." Elena beamed, nudging the woman next to her. "Here it is. The official handover." "Ah, finally!" Julian stood up, wiping grease from his chin with a silk napkin. "I assume you have the contracts?" "I'm ready to sign, provided the reclusive owner has met my terms regarding the staff retention." The lawyer didn't pull out a contract. He pulled out a single, thin sheet of paper. "Mr. Vane, we've completed our due diligence on your Vane real estate empire. It appears your empire consists of 3 shell companies, a leased penthouse you haven't paid rent on in 4 months, and a series of high-interest loans from less than reputable lenders." The sound of silverware hitting plates stopped. "What?" Elena's voice was a tiny, fragile thing. "Furthermore," the lawyer continued, his voice projecting to the back of the room where Arthur sat calmly, "the Sterling Trust has issued a formal cease and desist. You have been representing yourself as a cousin of the Sterling family to secure credit across the city. The trust has no record of your lineage. You are, for lack of a better term, a ghost." Julian's face went from white to a sickly, mottled gray. "This is a mistake. A clerical error. I'll call my lawyers." "Your lawyers resigned this morning due to non-payment, Julian," the lawyer said. At the back of the room, Arthur leaned back in his chair. It was time for the comic relief. Marcus, the valet who had been guarding Arthur's car, suddenly appeared in the doorway. He was holding a small plastic bag. He marched right up to the head table and slammed it down in front of Julian. "What is this?" Julian sputtered. "Your luxury watch," Marcus said, grinning. "The gold plating started flaking off when I touched it. I thought you'd want it back before the trash. Collectors took it for a clerical error." The table erupted in muffled giggles. Elena turned to Julian, her face a mask of horror. "Julian, tell me this is a joke. Tell me you own the company. Tell me you're not broke." Julian scrambled for words, but his mouth just opened and closed like a landed fish. Arthur stood up from his table. The movement was slow, deliberate, and somehow, the entire room shifted its focus toward him. He didn't look like a janitor anymore. He looked like the only man in the room who knew exactly where all the bodies were buried. "I think the party's over, Elena," Arthur said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the hall. The atmosphere in the grand refectory shifted from a celebration to a morgue. Julian was trembling so violently that he knocked over a glass of red wine, the liquid spreading across the white linen like a fresh wound. "Arthur, sit down," Elena hissed, her voice cracking with desperation. "This is a private legal matter. You're just making it worse." "Actually, Elena," Arthur said, stepping out from behind the floral arrangement and walking toward the head table with a grace that didn't belong to a janitor. "I think I'm the only one who can make it better, or much, much worse." Julian looked up, his eyes bloodshot. You're a nobody. You're a floor scrubber. Henderson, get this man out of here. Arrest him for trespassing!" Mr. Henderson stepped forward, but he didn't move toward Arthur. He moved to the head of the table, standing directly behind the high-backed velvet chair that had remained empty all night, the seat of the master. With a sharp, practiced motion, Henderson pulled the chair out. "Your seat is ready, sir. I apologize for the delay. The riffraff was more persistent than we anticipated." The room went so silent you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Arthur sat down. He didn't slouch. He didn't gloat. He simply rested his hands on the table. "You know, Julian, you were right about one thing. The reclusive owner of the Sterling Trust did cover the bill for the flowers. But it wasn't out of professional courtesy." Arthur looked at the florist who was still standing by the door. "It was because I didn't want the orchids to wilt before I had a chance to enjoy them in my own home." Elena's mouth fell open. She looked at Arthur, then at Henderson, then back at Arthur. Arthur, you're the reclusive hermit? But we lived in a 2-bedroom apartment. You worked 40 hours a week in a gray shirt. I liked the apartment, Elena. It was easy to clean, Arthur said simply, and the gray shirt reminded me of what it's like to actually earn a living. Something Julian wouldn't know if it hit him in his unbranded velvet loafers. Julian tried to stand up, but his knees gave out, and he slid halfway under the table. This is a setup, a prank! You hired these actors. Henderson is an actor. That lawyer is an actor. The taller lawyer stepped forward and dropped a heavy, leather-bound folder in front of Julian. I am a senior partner at Sterling Vance and Associates. My hourly rate is $4,000. If I'm an actor, Mr. Vane, I am remarkably underpaid. Marcus the valet stepped into the room again, holding a set of keys. Sir, he said to Arthur, I've moved your 2012 sedan to the front of the line. But I also took the liberty of warming up the armored SUV, just in case you wanted to escort the guests out personally. Arthur smiled. Thank you, Marcus. Give Julian his keys. I believe he has a long walk ahead of him once his leased car is repossessed at the gate. Elena grabbed Arthur's hand. Her touch was cold and frantic. Arthur, honey, I didn't know. I was just trying to push you. I wanted you to be better. Everything I did for us. Arthur gently pulled his hand away. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the cream-colored invitation she had sent him. "I'm trying not to smell like bleach," Arthur read aloud. He looked around the room. The funny thing about bleach, Elena, is that it's very good at removing stains. And looking at this table, I see 2 very large stains that need to be cleared out. He turned to Henderson. The party is over. Cancel the Sunday brunch. Donate the food to the local shelter. And Henderson? Yes, sir? Ensure Mr. Vane and his fiancée are escorted to the edge of the property. Not the service entrance. The main gate. I want them to see the Sterling name on the archway one last time as they leave. 10 minutes later, the estate was quiet. The socialites had scrambled to their cars, terrified of being associated with Julian's fraud. Elena's screams of "Arthur, wait!" had faded as Marcus and the security team led her down the long cobblestone drive. Arthur stood on the balcony, watching the taillights of his own sedan disappear. Down the hill, he had given the car to Marcus as a valet tip. Henderson walked up behind him, carrying a bucket and a mop. "Sir, the guests spilled quite a bit of wine in the foyer. Shall I call the cleaning crew?" Arthur looked at the mop. He felt the weight of the $50 billion empire on his shoulders. The board meetings, the legal battles, and the endless spreadsheets. Then he looked at the simple wooden handle of the mop. He took it from Henderson's hand. "No, Henderson, I've got this," Arthur said, a genuine smile finally breaking across his face. "I always was better at cleaning up messes than making them." As the moon rose over the obsidian estate, the reclusive billionaire began to mop his own floors, whistling a quiet tune, finally enjoying the silence of a house that was finally, truly clean.